Every new brand extension starts with a new idea. The question is, will it build your brand or will it dilute it? That's the kind of thing you want to know in advance. And so what we want to talk about is putting some safety checks in place today that can help you avoid that. And we'll give you some specific examples of how to apply each one of those. One of the best lessons I learned from a branding perspective was from one of my fellow students. She was an intriguing woman. She had this fabulous French accent and these cute little stylish clothes, and everybody wanted to be her friend. And frankly, she sounded so much smarter than anyone else in every class. We all had her on a pedestal, and we wanted to be her, be like her, and be known by her. She was wonderful. A couple of months, 2, 3 months into school, she decided she was bored with the act, and she showed up for school the next day. She had no French accent. She had dropped the French clothes, and she was ready to learn. We were all sort of horrified. We were confused. It was way too much work to figure her out, and we just avoided her. Relationships are pretty much the same, whether it's a brand or a person. And so if you're not consistently yourself, you'll confuse people and they'll want to walk away. That's the last thing you want to do. So what we want to do is take a lesson from the college experiment and avoid it completely. When you're doing brand extensions, there's a number of things to consider. The opportunities out there, the organizational capabilities, and brand alignment. Today, we're mostly just focusing on brand alignment. Great example of that is Dole. You know exactly who they are. They take fruit, they put it in a can, it's consistently ripe, you can put it on your shelf, it's going to last for a while. They have the Starburst in their logo that immediately makes you think about sun-ripened fruit and that great flavor. It's very simple. They've stuck with who they are. They know who they are. We know who they are, and they stayed there. They created products that were portable, so you could put them in your lunch. They also created things that you don't even have to refrigerate by creating fruit roll-up, frozen products that you'll have in the freezer and can enjoy in the summer, as well as the juices. So they've done a really great job of staying with exactly who they are, and they've done a great job of consistently presenting themselves exactly as we expect it. There's lots of reasons to create new line extensions. We live in a easily bored society. You've got to keep everybody's interest. So you launch a new product. You gain interest, all of a sudden it's going to start to wane unless you create another option that will build that interest. So if you want to increase the brand loyalty over time, you typically have to do something to hold everybody's interest. An extension is an excellent example of that. So there's great reasons to do this, and there's lots of options out there. The question is, which option do you pick? The point here today is that you need a criteria for evaluating those extensions. So what is your criteria for evaluating those options, those different line extensions? It's your brand strategy. You have one, and if it has the elements that you need, you'll be able to evaluate your strategy. So let's talk about what strategy is and what it isn't. We've certainly seen companies go awry because they don't have clarity in the difference between the strategy and the tactics that they're implementing. So strategy, in our mind, is an overarching flexible guide that will allow you to evaluate the extension. A tactic is an implementation of that strategy, and it's action oriented. So let's look at some specifics. A real life example that you're certainly aware of is the Atkins diet. It was a low carb diet, high protein. It really affected sales of high carb products. So a lot of companies that had really great growth for years were suddenly losing revenue. They often overreacted in this instance. They created new products. They gave up shelf space for their long-term products. They created products that didn't necessarily taste all that great, to be honest, just trying to meet this fad. They had to change their operations. They had to change their sales. They had to change their messaging. They had to reinvent many things about their company. And then the fad wore off. Everyone went back to eating high-carb products, and all these companies were left with brands that were diluted, and they had to regroup and rethink what they were doing. So it's a natural knee-jerk reaction to a really big change in the industry. But if you had those strategic elements in place that work as your overarching strategy, you could stand your ground and not be slid off your track. So tactics, they work within a given set of finite circumstances. Those circumstances change, and then a plan will need to be created rapidly in order to address that. An example of that specifically was Erin Baker's breakfast cookies. This was her original package before they started working with us, and they came to us looking for a diet product because they had also been affected by the Atkins diet. We created an overarching strategy with them in order to help them figure out who they should be now and in the future. Fortunately, they ended up pulling the diet product. They rebranded their whole line and they understood who they were. So they had the confidence to build out a number of new products very, very quickly and had amazing growth because of that. So the strategy that they used to keep themselves in place offered a guide that was constant in the midst of all of the changes that are going to occur. And the same strategy can keep you in place and keep you on track. Even though the needs of your buyer shift, your competitive offerings are going to change, your competitor set's going to change, distribution changes, financing, ingredients requirements, everything's going to change along the way. But that overarching strategy is the thing that can keep you in place. So a strategy, of course, is flexible. It's going to move within a larger vision, and it's enough of a guide to stay on course. But still, what in the world does that mean, right? How do I apply this? So let's get specific. What does this strategy mean now that we've covered the difference between strategy and tactics? The specific elements in a strategy are going to be these that are listed up here. We're going to talk about each one separately and talk about how they're applied. You need a strategy. Of course, you have to have a strategy, but it also needs to be accessible. You need to have it written down and you need to be able to actually use it as a criteria. If it's vague and it's not written down and it changes because you can't remember it from one time to the next, it won't be working for you very well. So let's talk about these specific elements. Values was one of the first ones on the list. And of course, the question here is, how are your choices reflected in any brand extension that you want to develop? But before you can even answer that question, it's great to look at your values and make sure that they're authentic and not aspirational. If they're aspirational, you could be kidding yourself. You could be trying to promise the customer something that you can't actually deliver because they're not really your true values. They're something you hope to be someday. Look at Crisco. We love them. They make tasty comfort food. It's fried, it's wonderful, it's unhealthy, it's processed, it might be chemical, we don't know what's in there, we don't care, it's yummy. It's not healthy, that's fine. But then this natural healthy food emphasis has come into the market. The consumer wants it. What does Crisco do? They decide they're going to go natural and make a healthy product. It really feels contrary to their values. It may even remind people about how unhealthy their regular product is and cause some issues in the brand. You can see the friction here that they're creating just from their marketing. It's trying to make you believe that their values have shifted. It's not successful in my opinion. It's almost impossible to reinvent your values for an extension. Another element that's really important to consider, which was on that list, was personality. And just like values, it needs to be defined really accurately and stick to that. Use it as a criteria. Does it fit? Does it work? Does this brand extension follow the personality? A really great example of that is what Gene Simmons has done with Kiss. He's a pretty brilliant marketer. Some say he's a better marketer than a musician, but he certainly has been very successful at both. You can see he has all these product lines. We know the personality. It's fun, it's a little rebellious, and it's good old rock and roll. He's also branched out into some digital products you can see on the bottom right, but he stayed well within the personality. Another core element that's really important to define and understand and use as a criteria are the strengths and weaknesses of your brand. How are those strengths leveraged and how are their weaknesses minimized? It's important to do that, and it's important to not just cover up a weakness. So let's look at an example of how a strength played out really well for a company. We all know Crocs. Adorable brand. They'd have done a fabulous job. They stayed within who they were. They created a whole bunch of different new products really fast, and actually they rapidly saturated the market. The question is, where do they go from here, and how do they apply this criteria that we're talking about to growth in the future? What did they do? Let's take a look at that. One of the important things that Croc needed to consider was their target audience. Would a new brand extension meet the need of the audience, and what is the audience perception of their brand? They need to stay within those boundaries. So what do they do to branch out into a new area? They tried fashion. This doesn't fit with ugly and functional. They haven't done well, it didn't work, and they probably needed to, again, stick with who they were. And if they wanted to go into fashion, they could leverage all their operational capabilities, all their visionary abilities, do this, but do it under a different brand. Another example is oil of Olay. We know it as a household product from our mom's generation. It's inexpensive, it's accessible, it's a drugstore brand, it's processed, and it's probably pretty chemical. And some people are wondering if they should put it on their skin any longer. This health thing hit again. People's awareness changed. So what did they do? Oil of Olay introduced supplements. I'm not sure I could trust that same company with products that I would ingest. Is it meeting a need in the market? Absolutely. Does it fit their consumer's perspective of their brand? Absolutely not. And I guess they launched it initially. It wasn't all that successful. They're still making a go of it as far as I know, and we'll just have to see how that pans out. Category business is a very important element. It's deceptively simple. Many companies think, oh, of course we know what category of business we're in. But honestly, you have to consider what you're producing now, what you might create in the future, and make sure that you define your category of business wide enough to cover all of those possibilities, but specific enough that it's very easy for the customer to get their head wrapped around. A specific example of a successful application of a correct category of business is Aaron Baker's. Once that was defined and we got that strategy in place, they have stayed with that and they have had brilliant executions over a long period of time. The customer understands who they are. The store buyers understand who they are and are very quick to purchase from them and put them on the shelf. Core purpose is another very important element. Mission statements, from what we've seen, have been ineffective in that there are a number of paragraphs and they're kind of unwieldy and hard to get your head wrapped around. A core purpose is a very simple statement that's easy to remember and therefore easy to use as a criteria when considering an extension. So the question is, how is your brand's purpose reflected in the extension? A really excellent example of that is Martha Stewart. She has not confused anyone. She's stuck very, very much with her core purpose. Basically, it's homemaking as an art. You could say that many different ways, but conceptually, that's what she is at her core. She's got the TV show, magazine, all kinds of household products, even pet. It's brilliant. It all makes sense. She completely understands what her core purpose is and has executed on that exceptionally well. Positioning your brand correctly is another very important element. It needs to be radically different from your competition. You need to stand out from the clutter. It also needs to be very meaningful to your target audience. It's difficult to create a positioning statement that hits this exact spot, that isn't leaning in one direction or the other. But if you do, you will definitely have far more success than if you don't. A great example of that is Tommy Bahama's. Their positioning is making life one long weekend, and they've got all the pieces to make that happen. So what they could consider, obviously, is adding mixers to go along with their alcohol. They could move into luxury foods, cheeses, and chocolate. That absolutely makes sense. What they wouldn't want to do is develop diet versions of any of these. And the reason is, if you diet, you're restricting your behavior. It's not the indulgent long weekend that Tommy Bahama wants to create. It doesn't make any sense for them. A long-term goal is a very important element in that overarching strategy. It will not only create a wonderful way, again, to keep you in line when you're making decisions about extensions, but it will engage your entire organization on a deeper level and pull them forward. It's important to answer the question when you're considering a line extension, how will your brand's goals be advanced? Let's look at a really great example of a long-term goal. Honda makes engines. They want to make the best engines. They have to wrap a car around it in order to sell it, or another piece of metal, but they do that and they do that very well. They've kept consistent with that for years. It's driven the company forward. They make excellent engines. They're still doing it, and it's been a long-term goal that's kept them going for a very long time. Okay, we've covered a lot of things today. We've established that there needs to be an overarching strategy that's going to guide your thinking when it comes to brand extensions. We know the difference between a strategy and a tactic, so we won't get pulled sideways. And we've looked at those specific elements within that strategy that are going to help you stay on track, and then specific examples of how to apply those. Hopefully that offered you the clarity and the guidelines to make those decisions. And those decisions made well are certainly going to help you avoid that whole college experiment scenario. And if you create an image that's authentic, it's easy, it's much more natural for your company to maintain, and it will likely be far more successful in the long term. So that concludes our talk today. I want to make sure you get this next slide. It's got my contact information. I'd love to hear your stories, good and bad, when you've implemented this well, or maybe when you've had a struggle, and I'd love to answer any questions you have on the topic. So please contact me at any time. I look forward to talking with you. Thanks.